Hi everyone! So today we're going to talk about consent because it's super important with that how you can have healthy, safe relationships. So what I'm going to have everyone do is try to take out a piece of paper. So when we talk about consent, so let's write down the word consent. Think about, what does consent mean to you? So what does consent mean? If I was in the classroom today and I walked in and I asked you, what is consent? Maybe you could share what that means to you. So I'll let everyone a minute, write down what they think. All right, so I even wrote down some stuff too, so we can have a conversation from it. So the most common responses that I hear from students, usually what they say, Mr. Nate, consent means to give that permission, and it's a communication and a mutual decision. Okay, so give permission, communication, and a mutual decision. Which absolutely, that's exactly when we talk about consent. We have that communication and the mutual decision and agreement. All right, so I do have a PowerPoint here as well, so if you all want to take a look at that at your own time, please do so. That PowerPoint is going to talk about what I'm talking about essentially today, but just giving you a better overview of an in-class discussion about it too. So when we talk about consent, mutual decision, and getting that permission. So it's really important. Any sexual activity, intimate behavior, touch, you have that permission. And how consent is really important with communication. That is one way relationships. All right, so when we talk about consent, the reason why we need to talk about consent is because how many of you watch a Netflix show or Hulu, or listen to music, or watch music videos? How many of you actually see when there is an intimate scene coming on? So, say you see a kissing scene, or and some kind of intimate behavior happening. How many of you had seen that consent happening? All right. So usually, a lot of people, when I say this, they're like, no, I've never seen. Really, I haven't seen any where there's a lot of showing that consent. So this is why it's really important, because it's important that a lot of the media and what we're exposed to, it's really important that we talk about it, because we need to make sure that we do have a healthy, safe life as well. So when we talk about consent, it's really important to remember we have to make sure that we do have that said, that that permission, that agreement, because if one does not have that decision or agreement, it's considered sexual assault and sexual violence. So we want to prevent that from happening. So that's why having these conversations of consent is super important. Any kind of sexual behavior, it has to be a free, willingly, and mutual decision and agreement between everyone involved. So when we talk about freely given, what that means is that it's not okay to ever pressure someone. No one should ever feel pressured or forced into any sexual activity. And another way we also talk about it is when we talk about freely given, is if someone is under any substances, such as alcohol, drugs. So if someone is drunk or if they're high, they can't consent. So that's super important to know, that if anyone's under any kind of substance or alcohol, one cannot consent. Okay? Another way with freely given, say if someone's asleep, if someone's, that's not okay either, right? It has to be freely given. All right? So then we get into the next one. Consent can also be reversible. Any single time, anyone can change their mind. Okay, so consent, it can be reversible. Okay, so we can change our mind at any time, and that's super important to know. And then when we talk about informed, what that means is that everyone needs to be informed of sexual activity. So who's using contraception? What is my status? Do I have any STIs that I should tell my partner about? So yeah, those are really things to keep in mind when you are with your partner, okay? Now we're going to talk a little bit about body language. So that goes with enthusiastic, because it's really important to also, when we keep in mind with consent, to also make sure that with someone's body language, paying attention to their body language, because that's super important too. So, enthusiastic, so some examples are, if someone is pulling back, do you think that is consent? No. If someone is silent and not saying anything, does that equal consent? No. So, you need to stop, check in with your partner, and see, having conversations with your partner, because that is how we can make sure that, yes, we can pay attention to their body language, we can pay attention to the person, and that's how we can make sure that we do have consent in our relationships. Now, the last one we're going to talk about is specific. So what that means with consent, so if one has agreed to one thing, so say a person has agreed to only kissing, that doesn't mean that they agreed to every single thing, every other behavior or intimate behavior, okay? One has to, every single time you engage in intimate behavior, we have to ask for consent, okay? Any single time. So, from the very, very, very start to the end, we need to be continually having conversations with your partner about consent. Okay, so we like to call this method the Fries method, because that's really another way that you can remember consent. But I think what it's really, really important to remember is that, consent has to be that freely given. Everyone has to be involved, and it has to be a mutual agreement. So it's really, really important, again, that consent can be reversible. It can be changed anytime. Informed, right? You need to have these conversations with your partner, because it's super important, okay? Enthusiastic, right? Paying attention to those body language, those other nonverbal cues, okay? Making sure that your partner, that's why it's important to have these conversations with your partner. And then specific, so right, saying yes to one thing doesn't mean that you said yes to everything, okay? So I know like a lot of this when we're talking about it, especially just when we talk about sex, right? Just sex and consent. We sometimes feel a little uncomfortable with it. But at the end of the day, we need to be having these conversations with our partners, because yes, we need to be having them, because this is how we can make sure that we are respecting people's boundaries. We overall are respecting others, but at the same time, we're making sure that everyone, we can prevent violence from happening, and we can make sure that they feel safe. So say if I was in the classroom right now, and I asked you, how could we ask our partner for consent? I'm going to write down some. Okay, so these are some common ones that I hear from students. So some ways that you can ask for consent with your partner is, can I kiss you? Can I, would you like to? Those are some examples of asking, okay? Because, again, like we said, we need to make sure everyone has that mutual agreement in that, and they know, okay? So this is how we can ask for consent. Then when we're in any intimate behavior, we need to make sure and check in with our partner, okay? So when we check in with our partner, some ways of how we can check in is we can, is this okay? How are you doing? Are you good? Those are ways of how you can make sure that you're checking in. Because yes, although we ask, we still want to make sure and have these conversations continuing through our behavior, okay? We want to make sure that everyone, okay? And that's how we can make sure, is by checking in. And lastly, like I said, paying attention to body language, right? So, like, are they smiling, right? Are they not smiling? Do they seem scared? Are they shy? That's why we need to stop and check in, okay? So making sure and paying attention to those body language and those cues. All right, so like I said, that is some of the ways about what we were going to talk about with consent. So overall, like I said, we talk about consent because we want to make sure that we are respecting everyone. And this is how we can make sure that we are, preventing violence, but most importantly, just respecting people's boundaries and making sure that people are healthy and safe.